Charlotte Matthews, also known as Lottie, might be the most polarizing character on Yellowjackets, and there's good reason for that. Based on what I can tell, fans seem to have strong opinions about this one. They either love this character or they think she's evil. Is Lottie evil? Is she a victim or a villain? I am the Nautilus, and in this video, we're gonna try to answer that question. Many fans of the show view her as the potential villain of the series, with a little assist from the Antler Queen, of course. Over the course of the first 2 seasons, we get mixed messaging on Lottie's alignment. The writers give us reasons to distrust her in some scenes, and then later, they give us reasons to believe she is a benevolent protector. A lot of the trouble we have with figuring this character out is hinged on the Antler Queen and her exact relationship with her. Is she the Antler Queen? As in, is this part of her mental disorder? Or is the Antler Queen a real paranormal entity that's working through her like some kind of avatar? We still don't know how things work here. Either way, Lottie is an interesting character. As far as character evolutions go, she's also one of the most dramatic, going from a hardly notable background character to being central to the plot. And she also has a unique story arc in comparison to the other girls, and I think it would be a good idea to try to pin this character down. But before we begin, before we head down that rabbit hole, I must warn you that there are spoilers in them there hills. Don't say I didn't warn you. Shout out to these top tier tinfoilers you see on this list. Thank you so much for your support. Also, big shout out to the newest patron, Julia Pomegranate. Thank you, Julia, for being awesome. Your name and lights as promised. Also, gotta plug the Discord, a chill spot to yap about the shows that I yap about on this platform, and it's free. Okay, so where were we? Oh yeah, it's time to dive. So if we're going to get answers to any of our questions, we're going to do what we normally do. We're going to look at her actions and her choices to see what we can learn. This will let us know what kind of person she is, and it might give us some clues about her relationship with the Antler Queen. If the Antler Queen is real, then we can draw certain conclusions about the major mysteries and maybe even formulate a good guess as to the direction we might be headed in. But if the Antler Queen is all in Lottie's head, then that creates a whole new branch of different possibilities. There's not a lot to work with here, but the little bits we do know tell us about this character's life before the plane crash and an extended camping trip in the woods. You remember this scene, right? Now, the point of this scene is to create the idea or question in our heads that Lottie may be born with an innate ability to foresee disaster, a sensitivity that gives her extrasensory powers of some kind. We only know that somehow she might have known that this car accident was going to happen. So this is where the seed is planted, that Lottie's a bit odd. And it isn't her fault, which naturally creates sympathy for this character. This scene also tells us that Lottie's family comes from shmoney, which might explain why she looks like she's dressed to go to a child pageant. Yep, that's probably her daily fit. Obviously, an event like this is gonna shake things up a bit and maybe make your parents a little bit concerned. So in a later scene, we see little Lottie eavesdropping on a lively conversation about what could be going on with her. Notice that with her pops, the assumption is that something is wrong with her and it needs to be quote-unquote fixed rather than trying to understand it first. Now in that conversation, it's clear that they're divided on how to go about things. Mom dances around the idea of considering the possibility that there's something supernatural going on, while Pops is basically looking for a more conventional approach. Now let's jump to the montage of the Yellowjackets, the day that they embark on the fateful plane ride. Of course, Misty's moment was hysterical, but Lottie's was also interesting. The scene is short and relatively static, but there's a wealth of details here to draw assumptions from. So let's break down this shot a bit, shall we? First, there are several indicators of an upper class life. The most obvious being that Lottie's having a breakfast while a maid stands at attendance. I don't know about you, but this is alien to most people. The table, chairs, and plateware also look kind of fancy. So we know that Lottie grew up lacking very little when it came to material needs. Also notice that she's sitting at the table having breakfast alone. Obviously, all of this is intentional, and it lets us know that Lottie is mostly alone when it comes to dealing with this part of her life. Or worse, it could mean that her parents are emotionally unavailable in general, which I'm inclined to believe. Oh yeah, and about that maid, it seems that she's standing there to make sure that Lottie takes the pills, which could be an indication that Lottie doesn't like taking the pills and maybe she's had beef with her parents over it, thus the enforcement. Also, we should definitely take notice of the distant, listless way that she's moving in this scene. It's like she really isn't there at all. You almost get the sense that she's a shell of her real self in this moment, and it might be because of the drugs that she's taking. I believe these meds are for schizophrenia. I am no expert on the subject. From my brief research on the topic, hearing voices is not an uncommon characteristic for those who suffer from it. The point here is that this fact makes things a bit messy for us. I don't mean that as a critique, but just to say that this clouds our perception of later events because it makes us question the origin of all the weirdness that we witness in the woods later on. I should also mention a line that Lottie says when the team is boarding the jet that Daddy Warbucks chartered.
I can't believe your dad paid for a private plane.
That's pretty much his only form of parenting.
So yeah, we've got plenty of reason to think that Lottie's grown up taking care of herself on the emotional front. And this condition that she has probably isolates her even more. Now, before we get to the good stuff, I want to talk about Lottie's character, as in her personality. Now, Lottie's been pretty consistent in that department. In the first episode, when Ty comes up to haze a member of the team, Lottie's against the idea. This is generally how she is. And there's a pattern here. She remains mostly uninvolved in the dust-up at the kegger. In fact, after they crash, Lottie always seems to play the part of the voice of reason. I don't think I can recall a single scene where Lottie acts with bad intent. Except for that one time, Doom coming, when everybody tried to eat Travis. So there's that. But we gotta give her a pass because anyone who unknowingly takes mind-altering hallucinogenics concocted by Misty gets a free pass on whatever happens after that. But beyond that, Lottie's journey takes her from a quiet, unassuming member of the team to being the de facto leader of the group because of the supposed powers that she had. Lottie takes on the role of leader because she felt like she had to. She was chosen by the entity in the woods as a conduit to whatever the Antler Queen is. She's almost been cast in the role of a shaman in the traditional sense. Not doing so could be the end of her and her friends. So can you really blame her? In this way, she actually is kind of heroic, despite being portrayed as a pawn of the entity in the woods. Imagine if you were in her position. Let's say it's your family or friends whose lives hang in the balance, and you're stuck in this banana situation when you can't make heads or tails of anything you see happening. But somehow, this unseen force keeps intervening through you and saving the day. You might start to feel obligated to lead. Lives depend on it. All of this is to say that Lottie didn't choose this path. It was forced on her by dire circumstances, partly because the other girls look to her for direction. They've seen a lot of weird stuff, and they've survived longer than should be possible to accept any normal modes of thinking when it comes to making any sense of any of this. So it does seem natural that they would eventually consider that all of the madness that they're seeing is the result of something beyond their understanding, something supernatural. Lottie has the answers they need at the moment, and that's why things play out the way they do. I don't know about you, but it's starting to look like Lottie isn't so much a villain as a victim. Again, there's a pattern here. We mentioned how she was the one who protested the hazing at the soccer practice, right? We talked about the kegger, things started to pop off, she remained civil. And of course, it was that time she risked her life to find others in the middle of blizzard conditions. She allowed Shauna to beat her to a pulp, within inches of her life, just so that she could work out her paranoid rage and keep the band together. Just a little side note, I wouldn't be surprised if we find out later on that Lottie has done something like this before, like she's used to sacrificing herself for others. Anyway, why is it that despite all of this, all of her sacrifices, all of that selflessness, we still don't trust her? Well, it comes back to the Antler Queen question. Who is in control here? So if the Antler Queen is real, we can almost certainly absolve Lottie of any L's generated during their time in the woods. She was under the control of an otherworldly being far too powerful for her to resist. If this is all true, then this makes a lot of the events in the woods make a lot more sense. The Antler Queen appears to want to be worshipped. That's one theory. She keeps these girls barely alive and completely dependent on her gifts in exchange for a little blood sacrifice every now and then. Whatever the reason, she doesn't want them to leave. Okay, so we've discussed the Antler Queen is real scenario. Now let's talk about the opposing theory. What if this is all in her head as a result of schizophrenia? Maybe this was exacerbated by the insane levels of anxiety that come along with being royally stuck in the wilderness. The crazy thing is that if this is the case, she's still a victim of circumstance. The Yellowjackets spent a good amount of time in these woods. We can assume that she brought the appropriate amount of meds for the trip, so she didn't have enough to last the entire time she was out there. Also, it's not clear if the other girls even knew about this part of her life, but no one ever mentions this. So I'm thinking that maybe they had no idea Lottie had these problems. They would be less inclined to believe some of the events were somehow connected to her and the Antler Queen. Now, I just spent most of this video making a case for why Lottie might be one of the good ones. But it's time to throw a monkey wrench into that. Yes, I built her up just to tear her down. I'm kidding, of course, but the Lottie story isn't a bowl of cherries. In season 2, Lottie is all grown up. After the escape from the woods, she spent some time in a mental health facility in Switzerland, or was it Sweden? I don't remember exactly. But apparently she was non-responsive, although we do see her talking to another patient in a scene where she's trying to comfort them during a time of stress. Again, another signal of her being a person who has good intentions. But there are some details that run counter to that argument. Lottie runs a cult, a commune, and she really seems to want to make life better for others, but she sure has some strange methods. For one, she's been keeping tabs on the other survivors, including Travis, whose bank account was emptied, I might add. Very suspicious. She kidnaps Natalie to save her, as she says, from doing something stupid, but she could have gone about this in a less dramatic way, I think. These actions do create some questions. Honestly though, being a cult leader should be enough to qualify as someone who deserves to be looked at sideways. I've never heard of a cool cult leader, but I've got an open mind. We can also look at how she tried to convince the other girls to perform the hunt ritual. Granted, she did believe she was trying to solve a problem by doing so, but it does end up in someone's death. I think we can say that Lottie is more of a victim than anything overall, although she's not been spotless when it comes to her choices. That said, the way the story's been going, there's still room for surprises, so don't get too comfortable. Anyway, that's a wrap on this video, folks. I'm glad to finally do another Yellowjackets video. It's been a minute. This was long overdue. Misty is the next Yellowjackets video on the schedule. She needs an update. Also, deep dives on other characters and some more theories, so keep an eye out. If you enjoyed this video, you already know what to do. Be safe out there, tinfoilers. Thanks once again to the patrons. Much love, and until next time.